Uh, how can government school children be helped by all those who have a stake in government schools, the government, parents, uh, slash communities, and teachers?
How can government school children be helped?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
That's why I'm asking this question, is that there seem to be a lot of activity around government schools in terms of how giving them better meals, giving them uniforms, increasing their access to school, etc. But when I mean government school children be helped, I mean helped in terms of how can they be helped to learn better,
yeah.
learn better.
Yeah, I think, to address this issue, we have to go into our understanding of children. The tendency generally is to see children as some sort of weak beneficiaries who should be padded up with certain incentives and provisions. So they don't have clothes, give them clothes. They don't have food, give them food. But that is not really helping children in my view, because that is merely fulfilling the most minimum basic right and not just requirement. So that is to be assumed in any case. It's only when you go above and beyond the most basic, which is to be assumed, then you can say that you are helping the child. In the case of government schools, I believe helping the child really means that valuing the child, valuing the knowledge and the experience of the child, using that as a basis to enable learning, constantly focusing on whether that learning is happening or not, and where it is not happening, constantly being very active, very alert to bridging whatever gap that is falling, that is coming about because of any reason at all. So what does all of this mean? Every child who comes to school brings a lot of things. He brings a natural curiosity, a desire to learn, a general ability and desire to relate with the world, to relate with people, relate with others. The first thing we do is we start killing all of this. We in the name of so-called discipline, we try to mold children, we try to regiment them, we root out all of this. So I think the first step to helping children is to see what we are doing wrong and to stop doing it before you even do the right. I believe the damage we do to children is much more than the good that we would be able to do. If we stop doing the damage, the children are quite capable on their own to do so much more, which will help them. So this is part A, which is you understand that it is wrong to mold children, wrong to push them, wrong to guide them to the point where they lose their individuality. And very often, of course, the government system and adults actually harm children by beating them or emotionally traumatizing them or whatever, and children are scarred for life. But if we were to take a different view, if we were to take a view that how do children see the world? What do they find interesting? How do they look at the ordinary things of life? One way to understand this is to stand, bend, and look through your knees at the world upside down, and you will find the world is very different. That's how children feel when they look at the world. They look at a different height. They find everything very exciting. They look at wheels around them. They look at leaves and look at the shapes of those things. They look at insects, at animals, at birds. They look even at dirt. They look at fruit, at flies, at the sky, at everything. Everything is fascinating and interesting. And because it is fascinating and interesting, it's an entry point into learning. I don't need any special facility. I don't care if there is no building. Even in the rain, I could have a very exciting time with child. That is much more helpful than putting up a building and then scolding the child for dirtying the wall. So the key issue really is, do I see the world from the child's eye? Do I see the child as a person who has a set of interests, who finds everything exciting and interesting? When a child looks at a chair, for the child, that is not just a chair, it's so many things. It can be a scooter that he's sitting on and is going, it can be He goes under it, it's a cave. He can sit on it, imagine it's a star shape. He can make a fort out of it, fight, so on. So if the child can do so many things, and I come and say CHAIR and that's it, then I am being very reductive. I have to go with the flow of the child and build on that and add to it whatever value that I can. So that's the sort of very critical requirement. Next, I would look at how I can present engaging, interesting, challenging situations which draw the child in. How I would use the environment as a learning resource, whether it is the wall or it is the trees or the leaves. All of them are full of potential of so many things. We've discussed this many times. How leaves can teach you multiplication, how and so on. So helping the child then implies that you start using the environment itself as a means of engaging with the child, the world around the child, and whatever learning objectives that you have in your mind. As we do this, it's very, very important to have clarity on what our objectives are. For most people, the objective or the clarity is that I don't want these children to speak because that disturbs me. But if your clarity is the child is at this level as per my understanding, now that I've found out, then my next stage is to help the child reach here. If you have that kind of clarity, then you start looking at what do I do so that the child actually gets there. I think that the critical thing is for a teacher to always know exactly what the level of children is. And here I believe that community and parents can be partners with the teacher. They can support the teacher in understanding what the child does at home. They don't have to be educated sort of assessors or something. They simply have to tell the teacher the child is able to make this drawing, or child is able to say this kind of thing, or points this out, or loves doing this, or hates doing this, or when you gave this particular task to be done at home, it took so much time to do it. That's the kind of feedback that would help the teacher very much, provided the teacher is interested in knowing the child and what is the level where the child is going, and if the child is understanding what he or she is doing in the class. It will always happen that the teacher will end up having to teach broadly to one particular level in the class. Currently, we are not at a place where we are individualizing learning. That's not yet happening. But if you do know where children are, then you can create activities in the class where when most children are engaged, you can work with certain specific children to help them more. So that's the second thing which the teacher has to do, apart from actually initiating learning and so on, is to constantly know whether children are learning or not, and actually dealing with that. A very important thing is this stuff is all what we mentioned till now, is all general standard curriculum kind of stuff. But if you keep in mind that children will be entering the world of tomorrow, 20 years from now, then how do you help them prepare for a future world which will not be anything like today's world? In that the hierarchies are going to be very different. Who is valued will be very different. The kind of discriminations that we have seen may change. A new kind of discriminations may come. Whatever, so many other things will happen. But if we let the school continue to be a microcosm which reflects the worst aspects of our society, especially hierarchies and discriminatory relationships, biases, then we are seriously damaging our children. So one way is to help children experience more equitable, more equality-oriented relationships, which are free of discrimination, which are where you are not made to feel that you are not equal because of something your family does not have or your community does not have. That is not held against you, and you relate on equal footing. In any situation where you are not made to feel equal or you're made to feel unequal, your learning will be less than that of others, because your ability to participate will be less, and therefore your ability to engage and learn will be less. So if we want to help our children, we need to help them experience the initial shift towards the world of the future. And I think that it's fine to bother about buildings, meals, those are necessary things. but they are by no means the only things or the most important things.
Okay. Another question on the clamor for English medium schools, which seems to be a countrywide phenomenon. There is a view that there is no evidence that learning concepts in mother tongue actually helps. We don't know. I mean, that's the view. So therefore, and then learning English or all subjects or all knowledge in English helps the child cope with the world of future that you are describing. This is the view among parents, and therefore we see across states that if an English medium school opens, then where parents may find it difficult to actually pay for the education, they still pull out children from government schools or government aided schools and put them in these private schools. What can be done about this? Can something be done about this? Because there's been so much talk about this, but what needs to be done about this?
Yeah. Firstly, our general societal tendency is to go for the appearance of something rather than the actual existence of something. So, tendency is for a lot of schools to stage education. So you have many private schools which will say English medium, but the people there can hardly speak in English. I went to a school. We said we have computer in our school. They have an old 286 machine which is lying unused in a room because the school doesn't have any electricity. So if you go to principal's office, they will have a globe or one board or one chart. They want to appear that they are capable of doing something. Similarly, when you have these medical representatives, I don't know why they all have to wear a tie. How that is connected with medicines is not known, but the idea is to appear to be better. In the same way, this English education is the focus is on appearing to be something. Having said that, there is a whole lot of evidence, actually, research evidence, to show that learning in mother tongue actually helps. When a child learns in mother tongue, especially in the early years, till about 6 or 8, the child picks up the basic core structure of language. The child picks up the different ways in which language is used to capture the world around, to communicate functional aspects, as well as to create the world in your mind and to recreate it in somebody else's mind. These are basic things you learn in your mother tongue, and this applies a whole this is at the foundation of what then happens in terms of learning the subjects. And I have nothing against English. I think English is one language among others which should certainly be learned, and I believe children can learn many languages. My problem is with thinking that English is to be learned at the cost of everything else, and that's seriously problematic, because you're neither good in English nor in your mother tongue as a result, and our children are paying the price for this particular misplaced emphasis. In many countries across the world, you learn mother tongue and you don't even learn English in the case of some places where you end up doing fairly advanced work. In countries like Japan or China, for instance, if you don't know English, it doesn't prevent you from becoming a high quality engineer or a doctor or whatever else. That is because those countries have taken the effort to capture the current knowledge of the world in their own language very actively. They constantly are doing it. They've been able to build a culture of reading. They've been able to build a culture of wanting to learn, to know, to be aware, go beyond, and not be restricted to just getting a job. So to that extent, I believe that it is not that you cannot manage without English. But we have reached a particular point here where the societal perception is very fixed, and it's not going to be easy to displace that. So the way to deal with it, I believe, is to enable everybody to learn mother tongue solidly and also to learn English well, and as I have always said, to make English accessible to each and every person, to the extent that there is no particular advantage in knowing English because everybody knows it. For instance, when mobile phones first came and the calls were 16 rupees a minute, even for receiving, at that time there was an elite cadre of people. Now phones are everywhere those people who bought their phones earlier, now they're complaining that even a plumber has a phone and vegetable seller has a phone, implying that they feel less important because the others have got it. The same thing is what I would like to see happening in the case of English. One, identify ways in which very large number of teachers can learn English, because currently most teachers who are teaching English themselves don't know English. And how can that be done? That's a separate issue, but we've done a lot of work, a lot of research on this issue, and I believe that anybody who can speak any language can learn English, using that language as a starting point, using their own natural environment, and in any case every language has so many English words that it's a small step from there to using English. We have to get out of this mindset that correct pronunciation, diction and grammar is English. We have to move towards what it is used for, what it helps you in. Once we are able to define our pedagogy, which actually we are in the process of, and take it to teachers, the next step would be to help them on large scale to help children learn it. Alongside, I believe, there has to be a kind of parallel movement, you can say, of taking English on a large scale in a totally low cost manner to people who are marginalized or who are never seen as needing or wanting to learn English. For example, rickshawalas or auto drivers, maids or whatever, domestic help or whoever. So I would like to see a situation where any person who wants to can use English, and therefore knowing English does not give you social superiority over anyone else. So that's the direction in which to. However, this needs to be backed not by just a learning method, but by a whole lot of material which is inexpensive and accessible. So can we refine the use of mobile phone so that every person, for example, a rickshawala has a mobile phone, can he learn English from it? Can it be used for him to hear enough, to use enough, to see enough, to read enough? I would like to see micro stories go out in SMS forms, which everybody eagerly waits for and talks about and shares and discusses and reads. So we have these large audiences. We need to have the kind of media, the kind of material. We need to get it out to them. And lastly, we need to back it up with the larger access to the world and world knowledge, both in English. I believe it is not there sufficiently, and as well as in our own languages. And there what happens is that our own languages are the enemy of what they themselves can be. When we look at Hindi, it becomes so rigid and Sanskritized that it makes it difficult to communicate, whereas where you need to communicate, like in films, you use ordinary daily spoken Hindustani kind of Hindi, and that is far more effective, far more useful than the kind of directorate of Hindi terminology that is otherwise used. So yes, there is a need to change how things are happening in Hindi, how knowledge is viewed, how knowledge is accessed, and what it is used for. Lastly, I just want to say that whenever technology is used, what technology tends to do is that it replicates that same hierarchical mode of content-based learning, which happens with the textbook-based classroom. Whereas it is capable of making a shift where the learner becomes far more active, the pacing is according to the learner, the learning style is according to the learner, the references, the content, everything is according to the learner's context, which is not possible with a textbook because it is fixed. When you free learning from paper, then you should free learning also from the existing hierarchies, the existing one-way traffic that we have, and the kind of connect with the outdated concept of content that we have. Outdated concept of content is that typical middle class valued knowledge is seen as knowledge, not what ordinary people do. And therefore, for instance, why is there no material on how to maintain a cycle rickshaw in any language? Though there are so many cycle rickshaws, there are more cycle rickshaw people than there are car owning people, but there's a whole lot of material on cars. It implies that we feel they don't need any knowledge. So we are condemning them to an oral culture where with the limited reach, which only individual personal connections help, and therefore they will never graduate into another point, at another level. So I think we need to break out of the concept of what is content, what is worth learning. Only then we can use technology, and only then we can address the issue of English, of whose knowledge is knowledge, what worth you get from engaging with any educational enterprise.
Okay. One question taking off from this is a smaller question, practical question, is that given the increasing urbanization and increasing migration patterns in cities, even though teachers desire to have mother tongue based education of concepts, etc., we are finding that there is no one mother tongue in the classroom. There are many languages, or at least a few languages. In many cities, this was not the case here 20-30 years ago, but increasingly in cities like, say, Bangalore, you see all kinds of people with a lot of languages, children with many language backgrounds, they come into the class. So how there is no one mother tongue, and added to this is that now parents to belong to different language groups, so they come together. There are probably a couple of languages spoken at home. This presents a classroom issue and seems to be increasing even for those who want to deal with mother tongue to build the concepts. So how can we deal with that?
Right. Yeah. My history teacher always used to say that 1857 was a turning point in the history of India, but India refused to turn. Okay. Something like that is happening in India. Things have changed. Things have changed dramatically from even the 70s and 80s, when a lot of things which we are now doing were set in stone, as it were. But we are refusing to recognize that the situation has changed. For instance, we earlier never recognized diversity. We refused to believe that in the classroom children are not homogeneous, and we refuse to believe that they will not come every day. Initially, all curricula and textbooks have been made and still are made on the assumption that children are all alike and they will attend every day. But for a large number of children, in fact a majority of them, this is not the case. So we have assumptions which don't work in reality. So we have a design to fail system. So we had, let us say, a generally designed to fail system, and we had general lack of success. But what happened in the last decade or so is that some of our earlier efforts to bring children to school started to succeed. As a result, we now have children in school who traditionally never attended school. So we have working children, we have children from fishing communities, we have Muslim girls coming in, we have children with disabilities, we have children from social groups and linguistic groups that never attended. We have migrating children who are coming in at a time when they are near a school, they are inside school, and so on. So earlier we were designed to fail because we had diversity. Now we have super diversity. Our diversity range has increased and we have no pedagogy to deal with it. So we are now in extremely designed to fail situation. And it can be seen. We may scratch our head and wonder why children are not learning, but I think this evidence is looking at us in the face that we are systemically blind to certain things. One of them is that even if we take our pupil-teacher ratio norms as 1:30. Now if you look at the situation across the country, you will find that by the norms, the most common school will be what is called a small school, about 80-90 children. So by definition, you will have 2 or 3 teachers there. But you will have 5 classes. So it means by definition, most teachers, which means the common concept of teacher is a person who teaches more than one grade at one time. The multi-grade teacher is the norm. Yet our training is designed for the mono-grade teacher. Our curriculum, our textbook assumes one teacher will teach one group at one time. In the same way, we have this totally stupid assumption that there will be one language in the classroom in a city like in a country like India. Even the nature of this problem has changed. In the 70s, 80s, when it began to be sort of thought of and worked upon, the issue was defined as a home language versus school language problem. And how to bridge the home and the school language, many things were done. There were 2-3 levels in it. One level was that you spoke a version of Hindi in a Hindi speaking area, so you had to go from that to the standard Hindi. So the problem is, how do you learn the standard? Another was that you were a different language speaking person in a border area. How did you learn? And yet another version was that you are a tribal child. So if you are a tribal child in Odisha, you speak Kui or Munda, then how do you learn Odia? That was the question, and everything was designed according to that. Well, not designed, but people tried to bridge that gap. In all this, assumption was state language is worth learning, the other language is inferior, and if you don't get to that language, you'll remain backward, and you have to bridge it. These are the standard things. Now, there can be this can be questioned in a variety of ways, but that's a different direction from your question. The problem has now undergone a sea change with migration. The issue of migration is not just that in certain cities there are so many languages. Firstly, within the next 10, 15, 20 years, we will have more people in cities than we have in rural areas. Secondly, the migration is not to the nearest big city. The migration can be right across the country. So you may have tribal people, or you may have people from Bihar in Himachal, they already are there, for instance. Or in Punjab during certain seasons, you will have people from Punjab in Bangalore and so on. So there are 2-3 levels of this new problem. One is that you, for instance, in a tribal area, you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 languages, maybe 5 languages in one classroom. But in a city, today you can have 11 to 17 languages in the same classroom. So the number of languages is huge. Second problem is that in a tribal area, you have languages which are culturally, geographically, naturally spoken in that area. They are contiguous. So the tribal child will hear Odia somewhere in that area. But now you have a Punjabi speaking child in Karnataka.
Right.
They are not geographically and culturally contiguous languages or nearby or whatever exposed to each other. So you have a situation where you are managing languages which are from different zones, sometimes from different linguistic families altogether, and so on. So it's the diversity is of a very different kind. And thirdly, it is not being seriously assessed what the scale of this issue is. The scale is huge. The scale is huge. One is in sheer numbers, but the other is also in conceptual terms. I really don't think that we have serious pedagogical response to this. This is not the same as Spanish or Urdu speaking person migrating to USA and being in a city school in London. It's not like that. This is different. So how do we handle it? I believe that a lot of work needs to be done in this case. The standard simpler way is this. This is what I would like to seriously try out. One is that having multiple languages in the classroom is an advantage. Multiple anything is an advantage. Why should the children not learn from each other? So, for instance, So for instance, suppose we get children to play a game where they have to find a way of doing something. For example, one thing I've done with very young children is that they stand in a queue and they have to throw a paper ball so that it lands inside a narrow glass. And they have to then talk about how they can do it better and faster, because 2-3 teams are competing with each other. They have to give each other instructions. They have to strategize about it. Now, they're all different language speaking children. So what happens is, because they all have a common stake, they have come together to achieve something as a group. You find that they are able to overcome the language barrier. Each one learns a little bit of what the other is saying. So God knows how it happens. I have not fully understood, but somehow they find a way of communicating, managing. Maybe they use the state language, maybe they use one or two words from each other. What we have to do is create a situation where it is worth engaging with each other in the class for children. You don't have to know the language. The teacher cannot physically know the language of each child. So
Right.
if you find a way to communicate, you create a situation where you have a lot of worthwhile things to do, you have a lot of worthwhile reasons to communicate, communication will happen. Second, I would genuinely encourage children to respond in their own language to anything I say, and want to learn what they are saying, figure out. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the teacher to learn so many different new things which he wouldn't know. In fact, in that kind of classroom, you will learn a lot from your students. And when the student feels that, oh, the teacher enjoys this, then the student comes out and speaks a lot more. And when he does that, not only do others understand him, but he becomes so much more open to understanding what others are saying. So it's a question of what kind of classroom culture we are creating. I think this is what we should start with. There will be a whole lot of other linguistic, pedagogical, and whatnot, other kind of considerations, methods, techniques. I'm sure all of those can be brought in. But in the absence of these things, where you feel that afraid to use your language and where you don't get a chance to engage with each other, the rest of the pedagogies are not going to work. So, to my mind, I would use this as an opportunity to create a different school culture, which is welcoming and more open, and let the language take care of itself.
Right.